David Brewster here with Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is Meet the Ebow, and this is an Ebow. And I've had this for about 20 years, so this 2-decade-old, Ebow looks brand new, which is amazing. But these little devices are really, really cool, and they're kind of overlooked and misunderstood. But the Ebow was actually invented in 1969. It was introduced at an NAMM show in 1976 and eventually patented in 1978. And it went on to become, one of the secret weapons in the studio and also the live performance stage. And it's a really unusual and interesting effect. And I've had lots of, students and friends and complete strangers ask, like, what's an Ebow? And that's what this lesson's going to focus on. So the E in Ebow actually stands for electronic. So this is an electronic bow, and it's mimicking the bowing, kind of sound from the cello, violin, and the viola. And you can also get flute-like effects and bagpipe sounds and all sorts of cool stuff with this. So it basically provides infinite sustain. And I'm sure some of you watching this are probably thinking, infinite sustain, huh? So I guess if Nigel Tufnell's watching, he'll probably leave, some bad comments down in the comment section or something. But really, this does provide, infinite sustain. And it's a battery-powered, like there's the battery compartment. There's a 9-volt battery in there. But it's a battery-powered magnet. And basically there's this little recessed area here, and there's 2 little string guides right there. And you line up that recessed area with those string guides, and you basically select a string that you want to sustain or vibrate. And, even with my guitar volume off, you can probably still hear it's making my G string basically vibrate and sustain endlessly. And it will basically, sustain that string until the battery dies. It'll go on forever. One of the first players that actually used this on a recording was Steve Hackett back when he was working with Genesis on the song Carpet Crawlers. And you just hear this kind of brooding, sustained, single note pattern. And you can also catch it in music from Blondie and Big Country and some 80s bands too. But here's an image with a bunch of songs where you can hear the Ebow. At the opening, that was the song Forgiveness from Collective Soul, back in the 90s. I think that was on the Discipline Breakdown album. And this song actually has, a very prominent and distinct, Ebow that makes an appearance in the intro. And you'll find guitarists that use Ebows typically use it this way, where they establish a chord progression, and then they use the Ebow for melodies and these little lines and stuff on top. So it starts with the E minor bar chord, and then B major, and then C major, and then it ends with G major. And it creates this 4-chord, pattern. And then on top of that, they're using the Ebow and they're playing this melody. But with the Ebow effect, or with this little device, it sounds completely different, like this. Something like that, and it all takes place on the G string right there. So once you have that melody together and you start playing it with the Ebow, you're going to notice that you're not using a pick. You're using this to basically, sound that string. And then you're using all basically left-hand legato to create that melody. Now you could use one finger if you want to. Totally do it that way, or you could do it the way I did it a minute ago and use multiple fingers and try to actually challenge your fret hand while you're using the Ebow like this. most misunderstood songs that actually doesn't use an ebow, but then live guitarists typically did use ebows, in concert. But that's David Bowie's Heroes. And David Bowie's Heroes, actually the guitar part was played by Robert Fripp, and he did not use an ebow in the studio recording. But then pretty much every David Bowie guitarist after, Fripp did that, they used an ebow. So we're going to recreate that, just to kind of demonstrate it. But Heroes would be something like this. And keep in mind there's multiple layers of guitar parts. So it's going to sound a little bit empty without the bass and drums and everything else. But something like this. And then you'll distinctly hear this. Really just an example of just sustaining like a single note like that. And of course, leave it to Robert Fripp to create a guitar part that sounds like an ebow, but he wasn't using one. I think he was just using, sustain, like natural feedback and sustain. But then a lot of guitarists, like I said, kind of use the ebow to recreate that live. Now for another take of playing, melodically with an ebow over a chord progression, check out the song Box from King's X. And this is from their 90s album Ear Candy, which I think is actually tuned down a half step. But I'm just going to play this in standard. And a box would be something like this. Something like that. I'm just kind of playing around, but Ty actually does an extended ebow solo, or at least he did, around that tour. And really, really interesting to kind of see, this G, E minor 7, and C sus2, and then Ty just starts doing this, sustained, really crazy ebow, which is so cool. Another example of using the ebow over chord progressions, and using them melodically, check out the song The Drapery Falls from Opeth and from Blackwater Park, that album right there. And you can definitely find this really intricate, chord progression combined with this eerie, ebow melody, something like this. Wait for that cycle. But it's something like this. Really cool. And I love that kind of eerie, kind of gothic sound that they captured with that. But, once again, he's really just kind of playing a melody. But the ebow really does give it this really distinct, almost kind of a bagpipe, like a scary bagpipe kind of sound. Now for a more more recent example that actually begins with the ebow. Check out the song Take You on a Cruise from Interpol, and it's something like this. And it's going to start with the ebow. And then you hear the rhythm guitar come in like this. It's really interesting to find like a newer band, even though it's like a 15-year-old song now. But still, you know, at least it's in the 2000s and it's not from the 90s or the 70s or whatever. But that's interesting to find a newer band using, you know, technology technically from the late 60s and the 70s. The band REM actually has a song called Ebow the Letter, and this is from New Adventures in Hi-Fi. There's actually a lot of ebow on that album, so if you're an REM fan, you know, check out that one. And this one's pretty basic, but Peter Buck's basically using the ebow on the low E string, which is kind of unusual. And it's something like this. See there, it almost has this like dark kind of cello kind of sound because it's so low. Almost sounds like some weird like 70s synthesizer or something. But that's really cool to kind of hear it, you know, on different strings too, like that wound strings. You know, so different. Another example of using the ebow melodically, check out the song Space Divest from Dream Theater on the Awake album, and you'll hear Petrucci using one of these. Something like this. Simple example, but he's really just kind of creating this, you know, it's a melodic phrase from the song, but then he's mimicking it or doubling it, you know, with the ebow right there. And I love playing with stuff like that with this, you know, this little device, because it really does kind of change the way you play the guitar. You're not going to approach it the same way. It forces you to think differently, you know, as far as, you know, single string technique and thinking of melodies and, you know, kind of approaching the guitar in a really different way. The last example comes from the band Faith No More, and this is the song Strip Search from Album of the Year, and that's a great album. And guitarist John Hudson actually used an ebow for a guitar solo, which is very unusual to hear, you know, a whole solo played with an ebow. That's going to be something like this. You know, something like that. That's a really interesting solo. It all takes place on the B string, and you really have to kind of be on top of what you're going to play, because you can't really rely on patterns and shapes across the strings. You're on one string, you know, the entire time. So he's basically shifting way up there. You know, and I love that little bend in there too on that B note. I also like how he ended that phrase with the open B string waiting right there. such an unusual, sound, but it just really makes it distinct and kind of stood out, where it's like if he would have played a normal guitar solo, it wouldn't have really been as memorable or special. But hearing an Ebow guitar solo is so cool. It's like, no way, did he really, just play a solo with an Ebow? That's going to wrap this episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants with Meet the Ebow. And there's just something unique and interesting and kind of alluring about this little thing. And I know there are new versions of this that just hit the market in recent years. There's like a yo-yo or yojo or jo-yo or something. And I've had this Ebow for 20 years and it's never let me down. So I'm going to stick with the original, which all these examples I just played and the song list earlier, use the actual Ebow. So I might try one of the new, versions of this, but nothing really, replaces the original. So if you're looking for something to just really shake things up and, just basically forces you to play the guitar completely different, for under $100, you can grab one of these and it'll shake everything up. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to the Night Lessons and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.